Protesters demand justice for Julian Assange as a judge in London begins considering the U.S. request for his extradition. Canadian police arrest land defenders at a rail blockade in Ontario. And Samba schools target intolerance and the Bolsonaro government as Brazil gears up for the main carnival parades. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the south. Dozens of people have gathered outside Woolwich Crown Court in southeast London, protesting against the possible extradition of WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange as his extradition hearing got underway. The protesters says that the case against Assange is a threat to press freedom and to individual civil liberties. A Crown judge began hearing arguments from U.S. government lawyers who want to try Assange on espionage charges relating to the publication of U.S. military and diplomatic cables 10 years ago, exposing war crimes committed in Iraq and Afghanistan. If convicted, he faces a total of 175 years in prison.
We are here because it's been tested on us, on Assange, what's going to come on us. We're here for democracy, for freedom of speech, and for the life of a man who showed the courage, had the courage to reveal the secrets of the deep state that we wouldn't even know in the history books.
If you look at the overreach by the US government, it decides that they can actually hunt down a foreign journalist who published on foreign soil the truth. It will send the signal that no journalist anywhere in the world is safe from the overreach of the US establishment.
And earlier, we were joined by John McAvoy, an independent journalist in London who expressed strong doubts that Julian Assange could possibly get a fair trial in the United States.
Well, we've already seen that the entire story has been riddled with a completely unfair treatment of Julian Assange. And now if he actually reaches the destination for the US, we can only expect that it would actually get worse. Sorry, can I just add to that as well? Just this week, Declassified UK have released two separate articles suggesting that some of the judges involved in this case are utterly compromised because they have various financial links to the UK Foreign Office. So there's major questions over the independence of the British judiciary at the moment. And I mean, that's just talking about the UK, not even the final destination of the US. So I don't think there's any way that Julian Assange can expect a fair trial there.
And now for the next part of our series, Failure of an Invasion. On February 23rd, it seemed an invasion of Venezuela had begun with the excuse of bringing humanitarian aid. The attacks were directed at the armed forces in an attempt to break their unity. Madeleine Garcia reports.
The attack seemed imminent. The United States and its allies were preparing the invasion for February 23rd. With the use of so-called humanitarian aid.
They do the same thing everywhere. The US uses humanitarian aid to appear as the good guy. And even when there really is humanitarian aid, they use it to bring in weapons as well.
The aid organized by the US government has a strong political connotation. And the United Nations, the Red Cross, or Caritas cannot take part in a political action which uses humanitarian aid.
Top U.S. officials, from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the head of the U.S. Southern Command, joined in.
You will ultimately be held accountable for your actions. The President has been quite clear, and our job as military professionals is to be ready.
The response to such threats was stronger than ever.
Look here, Yankee, you won't intervene in my country. Come here and you'll get a beating. We will be your Latin American Vietnam. Never traitors, always loyal.
The Venezuelan military also began to prepare to defend peace in the country.
The Bolivarian armed forces are not afraid. We are deeply patriotic, and the strongest weapon for a soldier or a civilian is their patriotism.
Patriotism was not the message the US and its allies were hoping to get across, but the Venezuelan armed forces showed they were not for breaking.
My commander-in-chief, allow me to present you with the first rifle fired by a member of the militia, trained under the revolution. It is a token of civilian military unity.
In Venezuela, we want peace. We have the right to peace, to develop our country. And we do not interfere with others. We are peaceful people, but nobody should interfere with us. Donald Trump, take your hands off Venezuela and cut the threats.
Hijos e hijas, hermanos y hermanas,
sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of our armed forces. Now is the time to resist, to struggle, and to keep going forward. This is no time to relax or to doubt. No, it is a time of dignity and patriotism.
For Venezuela's revolutionaries, it was indeed the time for resistance and struggle. But for the extremist opposition, it was time for war and death.
Either the aid comes in or it comes in.
There will certainly be an intervention in Venezuela. All those who oppose humanitarian aid will be considered the enemy. There will be an act of war. So they will have to confront the multinational forces who will enter Venezuela. They have until the humanitarian aid arrives, and that will be led by an army from Brazil and Colombia, with of course a contingent from the United States. But there's no need to be worried, because this does not mean war, only that they will neutralize all those who try to stop the humanitarian aid from arriving.
In Venezuela, something strange has been happening for the last few years, because it is Venezuelans who go off and ask for us to be invaded or for them to seize our economic assets, as happened with Citco.
I want to make it clear that if anyone had the least idea that any leader of our armed forces, myself included, was going to lose heart or break ranks in the face of all these circumstances, they were sorely mistaken. I think that was part of their attempt to trick people, and that is why they failed.
They failed totally. They ran into a brick wall of a united army. Their big gamble was that the armed forces will split on such a scale that it will be possible to overthrow President Maduro and for Juan Guaidó to have his own armed forces, but that never happened.
It didn't happen, because in this moment of maximum aggression by the United States, the unity between the people and the armed forces held firm, and its most lethal weapon, the Bolivarian militia and the country's new doctrine of defense, is what we'll be looking at in our next episode.
Madeline García, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
Moving on, this Monday marks 1 year since the Cuban people ratified their new constitution. 7.8 million of the nearly 9.3 million eligible voters cast their ballots in a referendum where 87% voted yes in favor of the new Magna Carta. The referendum followed several months of constitutional reform debates which were held around the country, during which the Cuban people had the ability to act as a constituent body, discussing proposals that had been debated in the National Assembly. The approved constitution was proclaimed by Commander Raúl Castro on April 10th. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical move. Investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. Canadian police have arrested a group of land and human rights defenders at a rail blockade in eastern Ontario. A stream of police vehicles were seen moving in early on Monday, with 10 Mohawk warriors subsequently detained as authorities attempted to clear the area. The Teyedinaga blockade was erected by the Mohawk people in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people, stopping all trains going through their territory. They pledged to maintain that blockade until Wet'suwet'en chiefs confirmed that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had pulled out from their unceded ancestral lands. Actions have been held from coast to coast against the impeding Coastal GasLink pipeline project. Togo's President Faure Gnassingbe has been re-elected for a fourth term, according to a preliminary result announced by the Electoral Commission. He won 72% of the vote share in the first round of the presidential election, beating his closest rival and former Prime Minister Agbeyo Mikojo, who just got 18%. Gnassingbe has led the country of 8 million people since taking over in 2005, following the death of his father, Gnassingbe Eyadema, who ruled the country for 38 years.
Based on all the data obtained from the local Independent Electoral Commission and the Independent Embassy Electoral Commissions, the candidate of the Union for the Republic Party, Mr. Gnassingbe Essosimna Faure, is provisionally proclaimed elected President of the Togolese Republic.
Togo's opposition has rejected the results announced by the Electoral Commission. They claim that the election was marred with widespread irregularities, including ballot stuffing and use of fake polling stations, which allowed ruling party supporters to vote more than once.
These figures do not express the reality of the votes cast by the Togolese people. It is because of this observation that we vehemently reject these results.
From when I started voting in this country up to now, only one person has won. What's this game? Where only one person wins all the time. It's not right. We want change. We have chosen Agbeyo, and once again, the person who we didn't vote for won. We are tired of this.
A South African judge has issued an arrest warrant for Julius Malema, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters EFF party, after he failed to appear in the court for a pretrial hearing on Monday to face charges of unlawful possession of a firearm and reckless endangerment. In this case, Malema and his bodyguard are accused of discharging a firearm at a political rally in 2008. Malema's lawyers, however, have argued that he was not obliged to appear in court since trial has not yet commenced. The warrant will, however, not be effected until the next court appearance on May 8th. Lesotho's Prime Minister Thomas Thabane has appeared in court to face charges of murdering his estranged wife. Thabane is suspected of involvement in the murder of his then-wife, Lepolilo, who was shot dead in June 2017, 2 days before he took office for a second stint as premier. Thabane was originally supposed to appear in court on Friday, but could not do so as he was in South Africa, purportedly receiving medical attention.
In the case of Motobiananara versus the Crown, to which this court was referred, I find that there is indeed a substantial question of law raised. The application for referral of the matter to the High Court is granted as prayed. I now hand down the ruling.
A man who would have turned 60 on Sunday has died from injuries incurred following a fire at the Heaven Fesco service station in Mandeville, Jamaica. The fire started around 5 p.m. on Friday after gas was spotted pouring from one of the pumps at the petrol station. 4 other people were seriously injured in the blaze, which damaged the section of the station and 12 vehicles that were on the property. Dubbed the greatest show on earth, Trinidad and Tobagos Carnival is in high gear with Joubert celebrations that started at 4 a.m. on Monday morning. Joubert is derived from French patois and means daybreak. It marks the official start of the 2-day carnival celebrations in Trinidad and Tobago. Patrons release their inhibitions and douse each other in colored powder, paint, mud, oil, water, and even chocolate. Others bring folklore to life by portraying traditional characters. And in Brazil, tens of thousands of rebellers are out on the streets of Rio de Janeiro taking part in the world-famous Rio Carnival. Vying for the title of Carnival champions, the city's 13 top samba schools will have 1 hour each to wow spectators and judges with elaborate shows, colorful dancers and drummers. This year, Carnival is also being used to take a stand against intolerance and oppression of minorities by the government of President Jair Bolsonaro.
This matter of religious intolerance, I personally prefer to say that it is religious racism. It's not only intolerance, it is more than that, because it is prejudice against the African Brazilian cultures. Today is very intense thing, mostly because there was significant progress of neo-Pentecostal religions, Christian fundamentals, and some of them, not all. We can't put everything in the same basket, but some have a really hostile speech.
On Saturday night, security forces in the city of Porto Alegre attacked Carnival rebellers for allegedly not observing a requirement to end all activities by 9 p.m. Several members of the public sustained minor injuries in the chaos after military police officers started firing rubber bullets and tear gas canisters into the crowd. Our correspondent Ignacio Lemus has more from Sao Paulo.
The carnival is continuing across Brazil. The biggest turnout is here in Sao Paulo, with 15 million people taking part. It is also the carnival with the largest number of street blocks, as they call them here. Last year, there were 460 of these blocks in Sao Paulo, and this year, that has gone up to more than 600. You can see some of the people behind me, among them many who have come from other parts of the country to take part in Brazil's biggest party. In the middle of the festivities, there's a lot of satire and criticism directed at the government of Jair Bolsonaro and the censorship of those who oppose his policies. And this may be an indication of how the rest of this year will unfold. But for the moment, it's 4 days of partying for people who are in the middle of an economic crisis and want a chance to enjoy themselves.
We thank Nacho Lemus for that report. Let's take a short break now. Don't go away.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. A United States court has convicted Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein of sexual assault. Weinstein was found guilty of a criminal sex act for assaulting production assistant Mimi Halei at his apartment in 2006 and third-degree rape of a woman in 2013. The jury found him not guilty on the most serious charge, predatory sexual assault, that could have resulted in a life sentence. He awaits sentencing on 11th of March. Israeli defense forces have carried out airstrikes on the besieged Gaza Strip and the Syrian capital Damascus, killing 6 people. On Sunday evening, military jets targeted the Gaza offices and storage facilities of a Palestinian resistance group that Israel accuses of firing projectiles into its territory. And a few minutes before midnight local time, missiles launched from the occupied Golan Heights killed 6 people near Damascus International Airport. Most of the missiles were, however, intercepted by Syria's air defense system. In a related development, Israeli authorities have passed a decision to reduce the amount of food and other basic services offered to Palestinian prisoners in their custody. According to the Palestinian Prisoners Club, the prison authorities will cut the amount of bread, meat and water allocated to the prisoners. The number of books allowed and family visits will also be reduced. More than 6,500 Palestinians are languishing in Israeli jails, including over 500 who are being held under the so-called administrative detention laws. The laws allow Israeli to detain people without charge or trial for renewable 6-month periods. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is coming under fire for spending $18 million to host U.S. President Donald Trump for his first official visit to the country. Dancers and performers greeted Trump and his wife Melania in the city of Ahmedabad on Monday. The leaders were expected to discuss trade, the Kashmir dispute, and the contentious new citizenship law. Modi's budget for the Trump visit, including building a wall to conceal the slums that exist a short distance away from the airport. Our contributor Navodita Kumari brings us more on these developments.
This wall near the Ahmedabad airport didn't exist 2 weeks ago. In fact, it was made in a hurry to hide the view of this slum from the US President Donald Trump, who arrived in India just a few hours ago. There are about 2,500 people living in this slum, which lacks basic amenities like potable water, electricity and toilets. They told me that they feel humiliated by this move, as they say that the amount of money they spent on this wall, they could have used in making a school or maybe a hospital. The government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spent $18 million just in welcoming Trump in this city, which means that every minute Trump spends in this city, it costs the government $90,000. But the question is, can this wall hide the fact that India is home to more than a quarter of world's poor, and it ranks 102nd out of 117 countries in the Global Hunger Index? This is Navodita Kumari for Telesur English from Ahmedabad.
We thank Navodita for that report. In the U.S., Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders won a decisive victory in Nevada's Democratic presidential caucus. Sanders polled 44.7%, beating his closest rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, who scored 19.5%. South Bend, Indiana's former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who came out second in the New Hampshire primaries, stood at 15.6%. The win tightens Sanders' grip on the race, which moves to South Carolina next weekend. The killing of environmental activists has become the norm in Mexico. Last year, at least 12 environmental defenders were killed in different parts of the country, and impunity remains the norm.
The small municipality of Ocampo, with the surrounding forest, is home to one of the world's greatest natural phenomenon. Up to 500,000 monarch butterflies arrive to spend the winter in these forests. But this sanctuary, so crucial for the survival of the species, is heavily threatened by deforestation, mostly through illegal logging. And those trying to defend this land, like environmental activist and manager of the El Rosario Monarch Butterfly Reserve, Homero Gomez Gonzalez, often end up paying for this cause with their lives.
He never expected to receive any support from the government, but as pressure mounted, he ended up demanding it, with the support of his people. There were times that he protested in the streets of the state capital, even outside the government palace. And thanks to that, we now have a lot of infrastructure here.
Shortly after his disappearance, the relatives of Gomez Gonzalez reported to the police that he had received death threats because he had reported illegal loggers to the authorities several times. According to human rights NGO Amnesty International, at least 12 environmental activists were killed in Mexico in 2019, with one of them being Samir Flores from Central Morelos state, who was gunned down on February 21st, just a day after publicly opposing to a planned new gas pipeline in the area. And now, 1 year since Flores' death, irregularities and omissions have defined the investigation. There are still no convictions in his murder. What's more, his death follows a disturbing trend of unsolved murders of environmental and human rights defenders in Mexico. With few safeguards in place to protect local advocates and a weak rule of law, companies can bypass environmental assessments and community consultations.
We are talking about infrastructure that will be in operation for 30 years. We want to make more money, we want the refinery, we want the gas pipelines, but with all that we will remain stuck with this dependency on fossil fuels.
Meanwhile, the AMLO administration have taken some steps to improve the country's outdated environmental policies, like requiring all the main municipalities in the country to report air quality in real time.
While more than 30 states in the country have the capacity to monitor air quality, not all of them publish this information, or if they do so, it's not registered under a common criteria.
In spite of these levels of violence, there is a growing scene of environmental and human rights activism and commitment in Mexico. On the 21st of February, the 1-year anniversary of Semir Flores' murder, hundreds of environmentalists marched in Mexico City to show their discontent with the government's big infrastructure plans.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria, and also join us on social